You're listening to international investment advisor Doug Goldstein on the Goldstein on Gelt show, the financial show where we'll talk about how you can make the most of your money. With all the confusing financial chatter bombarding you each and every day, Goldstein on Gelt will give you the practical information you want and need about living a financially stable life. Here's your host, money maven Doug Goldstein.
Okay, we are back. We are talking to Professor Daniel Kahneman, who is an Israeli-American psychologist and the 2002 Nobel Laureate, notable for his work on the psychology of judgment and decision-making and behavioral economics. With Amos Tversky, as well as others, Kahneman established a cognitive basis for common human errors. Currently, he is Professor Emeritus of Psychology and Public Affairs at Princeton University's Woodrow Wilson School. Kahneman is also a founding partner of The Greatest Good, which is a business and philanthropy consulting company. It's great to have him on the show because Daniel Kahneman was born in Tel Aviv in 1934. He spent his early childhood years in Paris, where his parents had emigrated from Lithuania in the early 1920s. Kahneman and his family were in Paris when it was occupied by Nazi Germany in 1940. In fact, his father was picked up in the first major roundup of French Jews, but was released after 6 weeks due to the intervention of his employer, and the family was on the run for the remainder of the war. Anyway, eventually Daniel Kahneman and his family moved to British Mandate for Palestine, which was very soon to become Israel in 1948. So a great history, and it's certainly Israel is very proud of all the work you've done, and I'm very honored to have you on the show. So with all of that, welcome.
Thank you.
Okay. Let me just start, because we're talking about behavioral finance. As a financial advisor myself, this comes into play every day. I probably deal with or think about the work that you've done, but what I'd like to understand is, I understand your interest began when you were in the Israeli army. You had a project that you had to assess candidates for officer training, and you used an interesting test where a group of soldiers would have to lift a telephone pole over a 2.5-meter wall. And dealing with this test, you coined the term the illusion of validity. Could you tell us what this is all about and where this came from and what it means?
Sure. The test was not my invention. It was a test that was conventional in the British Army during World War II for selection of candidates for officer school. The illusion of validity is simply a sense that you know. It's a sense of knowing that is unjustified. And you very frequently get it. You get it when you interview people. You suddenly have the sense that you understand their character. And very frequently you just don't. So that's the illusion of validity. And it's quite common in our experience.
I see. So a lot of people feel in an interview that they get this great understanding. Some people say, well, I'm a very good judge of human nature, and your research has shown the opposite?
Yeah, well, that's absolutely true, and it's of course not restricted to interviewers. You get the same thing with financial analysts quite frequently. That is, they get a sense of where things are going, where in fact they have no idea where things are going.
Of course, that makes all sorts of decision-making very difficult if you can't count on yourself to really understand what's going on. How can you make a decision?
I don't know if you've read recently. There was that study. Actually, it's an Israeli finance professor, Yitzhak Ben David, on the overconfidence of financial experts. They had the CFOs of major companies. They run a poll of CFOs every year, and they asked them what do they think the S&P 500 is going to do during the next 12 months. Mm-hmm. And there are two observations. One is they really have no idea. Absolutely no idea. I mean, in effect, they're slightly negatively correlated with what happens in the market. But the second thing is they're tremendously overconfident. That is, they're supposed to set up an 80% confidence interval, And only 33% of the observations fall inside the confidence interval. In other words, they're surprised almost all the time. These people, if they told you what they really know, they should tell you, well, the S&P 500 will be somewhere between -10 and +30 next year. Mm-hmm. Because this is what, in fact, they know. They don't know anything, but they think they know.
Right, so people do have the I think the problem is if you walk around and you don't show any confidence, then no one's going to believe anything that you say.
That's absolutely right. And so people are actually paid to look overconfident and, handsomely rewarded for overconfidence. But it is also the case that people are not lying, that they really feel overconfident. They can't imagine the world going any other way than a particular way they imagine it. And because they can't imagine an alternative, they're confident that what they see is going to happen. But, most of the time we can't imagine the future.
Right. Well, certainly, right. We can't predict the future. We always tell our clients that, we really don't, in fact, know what is going to happen tomorrow. But I think that in order for people to act, don't they have to, A, be confident in themselves, and B, have confidence in their advisors?
Well, it's a very good idea to have confidence in yourself, so long as it's realistic. Whether you want to have completely unrealistic confidence in yourself just to be able to do things that are silly, clearly overconfidence justifies a lot of things that individual investors do. Professionals are a little better, but individuals who invest for themselves, by and large, lose money on it. And they don't know it in advance, and they do it because they're overconfident.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and do you find a difference between men and women in terms of overconfidence?
Yes, men are more overconfident than women, which is why, by and large, women, individual investors, with individual brokerage account, women do better than men, and significantly better than men. And they do better than men because they do less. That is, they have fewer ideas that lead them to sell one stock and buy another. So men pay a lot more transaction costs, and they act on many more ideas. In other words, they're overconfident.
Okay. We are talking with Daniel Kahneman, who is an Israeli-American psychologist and a 2002 Nobel Laureate in economics. We've been talking a little bit about overconfidence that makes people make all sorts of unusual decisions, or at least present themselves as knowing what they don't necessarily know. Other research that you've done, which really has been groundbreaking and has made had a big effect in my business when I deal with clients, is what's referred to as loss aversion. I think you demonstrated this in a study that showed the extraordinary reluctance to accept risk that's observed when people are offered a gamble on the toss of a coin. They're asked, if we toss a coin and you could lose $20 if you lose the toss, how much do you demand on the other side to win in order to play this game with me, right? And you found that people usually demand to get about twice the amount that they win. What's at the heart of this psychological peculiarity, and how can people and investors get past it so they can make rational decisions?
Well, what's behind it is something that is called negativity bias, which is that in the processing of information in the brain, threats have priority over opportunities. And you see that everywhere in behavior, that we respond faster. We are wired to detect threats. And that manifests itself, among other things, in loss aversion.
Sorry, I missed that last part?
Negativity bias manifests itself, among other things, in loss aversion. You just pay a lot more attention to losses than to gains. And so when you have, a bet with, as you said, a 50% chance to lose 20, then you'll want an equal chance to gain 40. That's about even. That about evens the odds for people.
I see. When you do that on a flip of a coin kind of a test, it's a little more black and white. When people do this in their own investment portfolios, how does this play out?
Well, in the first place, investors are a minority, that is, individual investors, and they're selected for their willingness to take more risks than other people. But when you talk to very wealthy advisors, which is something that I've been doing occasionally in the last few years, it turns out they are very loss-averse too. That is, they want to protect what they have. They would like, in addition, to get a lot richer, but their primary objective is negative. It is conservation of what they have. So they are very loss-averse. And when you want to discuss a policy that will be optimal for an individual, you need to be conscious of loss aversion. Because if you're not, when something bad happens to them, they will want to change. In the worst case, they will want to change advisors, but at the very least, they'll want to turn their policy, go to bonds, do something really silly. So a lot of the mistakes that people make in investment are acting on loss aversion, acting after losses.
Mm-hmm. I see. So if they're okay, so that's the risk is that the more loss averse you are, the worse decisions you'll make. For example, if your portfolio drops. Alternatively, maybe just understanding that you suffer from loss aversion would make you, at the outset, not choose to have a portfolio which isn't so risky. You'll say, listen, I know if it crashes. That is true, but people are also highly optimistic in general. So it is true that people who are loss averse tend to be more cautious than others, but it is also true that they may not be cautious enough. Because when they're investing, if things are going well at the point in time when they're investing, then, like everybody else, they're fairly optimistic. And at that stage, they are willing to take more risks than later, primarily because they don't know the odds that they're facing. And then they're surprised. So the main implication of loss aversion for investing is that you have to think about what you could sustain without changing your mind or without changing course. And that is the primary role of, that is an important role for the advisor, undoubtedly, is to anticipate the investor's regret when the investor might want to change his mind. Because if the investor will change his mind, then that's bad for the investor, it's bad for the advisor. And how do you recommend that advisors present this to clients? And there's a client comes in, he says, I've got $500,000 to invest. How risky is my portfolio? Right? What does that mean, and what's the best way to say it to a person so he really can make a smart decision?
Well, in the first place, you probably would want, as a financial advisor, to speak about, not to speak about that $500 million to invest, but to speak about the financial picture altogether, because you want a person's risk portfolio to be balanced overall. So then, when you talk about, say, that $500,000, the real question is how much of the loss would you be prepared to sustain and still stick with the same policy? Mm-hmm. And if the person tells you that they'll want to, or if even you get the impression that they will want to quit after relatively small losses, then they shouldn't invest in risk. Then they should be much less risky.
Mm-hmm. Right. I've found that in discussing with people, a case like this, I'll say to the client, rather than talking about percentage terms, which I don't think people can internalize, I talk in money terms. I say, if your statement this month is worth $500,000, and next month you get your statement and it's worth $440,000, what are you going to do? Because I feel that people can really appreciate when you talk about dollars in terms of dollars and a time frame.
Oh, you're absolutely right. The more concrete you make it, the better people think. So if you have a language that enables you to speak concretely about specific time, specific amount, specific date, this is clearly superior. Because what you want to do is you want to engage people in the exercise of predicting their future reactions. And that is best done by making it as specific and concrete as possible.
Absolutely. Okay, listen, I'm sorry to say, but I think we're just about out of time. We have been talking with Professor Daniel Kahneman, who is the 2002 Nobel Prize laureate, interestingly in economics, even though he's not an economist. And but his study of psychology has helped so many people to get a good understanding of how they make decisions and how other people make decisions around them. So, Professor Kahneman, I want to thank you again for being on the show, and I hope we'll have you back again soon.
Thank you.
Take care now.
You've been listening to the Goldstein on Gelt Show with money maven Doug Goldstein. Doug's weekly radio show is heard around the world, but if you miss it, you can download the podcast at www.goldsteinongelt.com. The Goldstein on Gelt Show gives you up-to-date financial ideas so you can get on the path to financial freedom. If you'd like your questions answered on the air or off, send Doug an email to doug@profile-financial.com. It's your money for your future, so join Doug every week to build your wealth on the Goldstein on Gelt Show.